Hello and welcome. Today we are in the Tier 10 Royal Navy aircraft carrier, the Audacious. So, some of you seem to get advice from when I play World of Warships and seem to think that you become better at the game as a result. Well, advice number one here: do not bring an Audacious into ranked, because it just gets outclassed by all the other CVs. It just doesn't work well, in my opinion. It is supremely bad, because it doesn't have the damage output, and all of the attacks are really easy to dodge, because you have to start the attack from really far away. Look, I have to start the rocket plane attack on a Shimakaze from 4 kilometers away. If that guy had her anti-air turned off, I wouldn't have done anything. And I mean, look here, we only did, what, 3,000 damage on a Shimakaze while she wasn't even really trying to dodge? That's... yeah, it just is not worth it, in my opinion. It just isn't even close to worth it. But, unfortunately, that is the state of the ship. We're probably going to be able to land another salvo on the Shimakaze as she tries to take the buff. So, part of the reason why the Audacious used to be good, or at least better than she is now, is because she had very good rocket planes. These were incredibly dangerous to destroyers. Not very dangerous to basically anything else, but very dangerous to destroyers, because they were able to do a lot of damage, because they drop a huge amount of rockets. However, with the change to rockets, I believe in the patch before this one, the drop patterns were changed, and you can see the Audacious drop pattern is... it's like a shotgun. So, you're probably going to hit, but you're probably not going to deal much damage. And this is really, really, really unfortunate, because Audacious doesn't really have much else going for her. The ship itself isn't great. I mean the actual hull of the ship. It doesn't have anywhere near as good armor as the Manfred von Richthofen does. It doesn't have an armored deck like a Richthofen or a Hakuryu or a Midway. That is, it does have an armored deck in the middle of the ship, but all the other portions aren't armored. Battleships will absolutely overmatch that portion. And that is quite a downside, because it means that in a Richthofen or in an Audacious, you can't go close the way you can in, say, an Audacious, for example. Sorry. The Audacious cannot go close like you can in a Richthofen, for example. That's the way around. Anyway, we're gonna try to deal with this destroyer as much as we can, because it's pretty apparent that the DD isn't an excellent player. And so if we can maybe get her out of the game, my team will feel safer. And maybe they'll actually, you know, win for once. Even that wasn't very effective, but I suppose all we needed was spotting there. Okay, let's avoid the flag bubble, but apparently that was slightly late. I'd honestly like to drop the Ohio, but I don't know if I want to fly in the AA of a Hindenburg. Also, can I actually drop from here? With a dive bomber it would be easier, right? Because you just go over the mountain, so it's no problem. But with these, do I have to drop like early so they'll hit them? Okay, never mind, we're gonna be okay. Okay, we're gonna start a fire on the Ohio. So if there's one thing that the ship is excellent at, it is starting fires and farming fire damage on battleships. Which is pretty horrible for arms race, mostly because when you have a few heals going on battleships, they kind of stop caring about single fires, because the fire damage just doesn't add up to all that much quickly. Also, squadron maneuverability enhanced. Does this mean planes turn really quickly? I don't know how I feel about the buff like that one for CVEs, because it'll screw with your feel for the ship. Okay, the Ohio is still burning, so let's try to line up a drop onto the Grosse Kaufest. So I should be able to line up this drop because the Kaufest is stationary, so I should be able to easily approach from the front. I suppose one good aspect of the Audacious is the fact that with the level bombers, it's easier to drop into float fighters, because obviously you don't have to fly up or do all crazy maneuvers. You can start the attack run from really far away, which is obviously a downside in most cases, but when you're dealing with a float fighter, it's pretty good because you get to fly through it. So how would I buff the Audacious to make the ship better? I don't know, actually. Maybe boost the plane HP, but one of the biggest downsides is that the planes are slower and you end up dealing less damage with them. And when you combine these two, even if the planes had more HP and all of that stuff, they probably never have enough HP to be able to make that something of an important factor. Because you'll still fly into flak bubbles and you'll still, you know, take the anti-air damage of many ships. That it just doesn't end up feeling good. Surprisingly though, in random battles actually Audacious is doing pretty well stats-wise. It's not the worst performing CV. But I mean, look, we do an attack run with our level bombers. We didn't start a fire. We started one earlier, but then she damage-conned it. And then we did the second run and we didn't get the fire. We did 15k damage in 2 drops basically. Compare that to Richthofen, we would have done like 30-40k damage. A Midway would have done 30-40k damage plus the fires. Hakuri would have also done like 20-30k damage. I don't know. It just isn't there. And I would say the torpedo bombers are straight up worse than the torpedo bombers of the Richthofen. Because Richthofen torps are just faster. And rocket planes, I would say, are actually better on the Richthofen too. Actually, I would pick rocket planes of any ship, actually, over these ones. Because it's just such a huge shotgun, and they have 28mm of penetration. Unlike Hakuryu rocket planes, which have 32. So these can't even damage battleships. They can't even damage all the cruisers properly. Think about that one. Whereas at least AP rockets, you know, it'll depend on the angles and all of that. They have enough penetration to maybe not Citadel every time, but even the August 1 Parseval, maybe not enough to Citadel, but hey, at least you can try to hit the less armored portions, and you hit many of them. So another thing, you know, I mentioned that you need to line up. Here, look at the angle I had to take with these level bombers to hit the core first, right? If I had been with dive bombers, any of the other 3 ones, I could have flown in and done the last. So essentially, the ship was going like so, right? And I will approach from here. With dive bombers, I would have approached like so and then turned at the end. But you can't do that with the Audacious. You would have to do the turn earlier, and that would have put me into the anti-air of the Smolensk, and maybe I would have gotten hit by some flak. Which all would have been quite unfortunate. I think she's had it. Yeah. Well, Smolensk, rough day, huh? Rough day. I mean, look at the enemy team. They're still grouped up despite the fact that they're losing. Well, actually, I suppose maybe everyone that wasn't grouped up is dead by now. She's reversing. Oh no, this is the greatest weakness of this ship. Let's drop a fighter. Maybe it'll trigger all of the other fighters and use level bombers to follow up. Oh, we actually caused the flooding. Oh, and I guess I'd never actually spelled out why it's bad to bring an Audacious. Of course, if you're very good at CVs, or maybe you're excellent and know something I don't about Audacious, the reason you don't want to bring an Audacious is that you're forced into CV versus CV matches. So, the enemy will have an aircraft carrier, and chances are it's not going to be an Audacious. And when you bring an Audacious, you bring a downside to your team. A Wait, she's not going forward still? Thought she was gonna accelerate. At least we got one fire. Maybe they should have like a higher fire chance or something. I don't know. But then you would probably complain about HE spam. The troubling part with fire balancing is that fire has synergy with other fire spamming ships. If you start fires, it's very rare that you're going to put every single part of a ship on fire, right? Even when you have many people firing at one target. And so you have enough synergy. If you spam more and more fires, you increase the chance that you're gonna set everything on fire. And so they synergize well together. If you have some fired ships, having more of them at once tends to be better. And so Audacious is one of those that would synergize with those more than many of the other CVs. Let's drop on a cruiser. I think this should be fairly effective, since she's standing still and I should be able to hit the giant superstructure for a cruiser on the Hindenburg. Well, 5,000 damage. Not great. But something, I suppose. Do planes fly faster with these? Reload speed of squadron engine boost. Wow, 80%. Yeah, maybe I should have used that more often. Well, anyway, we won in an Audacious, somehow. So, Discord chat? You know, you asked for me to play Audacious now and post this video as Audacious. So, you got this, but definitely I don't recommend Audacious. I think I would have done way better in essentially any other CV. But we still won because I got a lucky team that played well. So I guess I should probably compliment them. Damage, 30k from fires. I think one of the big part was that, I'm sorry to say this, Mr. Shimakaze, but you played very poorly. You didn't seem to have much awareness of what was going on. So some Destroyer players are gonna look at this and be like, well, I would have done mostly the same thing. They will never actually say that out loud, but... Or even maybe think out loud this kind of an idea in their head. But many Destroyer players probably will play exactly the same way. They fail to think ahead on what's going to happen. So if you want to play a Destroyer, especially in arms race, you must think ahead on what's going to happen. Treat every single one of the buff drops that will drop onto the map as though they are cap zones. And what happens when you go into a cap zone? Well, the first thing you think about is how is the enemy going to come here and how are they going to attack me as a Destroyer? You have to plan ahead for those kinds of things. And the same thing happened with the buffs. If there's a buff circle on the map, and, you know, there's a good chance that the enemy will think that you will go for that buff circle, you have to think about what you're going to do once you are attacked over there. And this Shimakaze didn't have a plan for that. She just didn't have a plan for that. Did I get all the fire damage on this guy? Oh, not all of it. Wow, 10k on the Ohio. Thank you very much, Ohio, for that damage. Then again, the most important thing that the CVs do, spotting, Audacious does that exactly just like all the others, 107k. So in that sense, Audacious definitely fulfills her role. She's better than no CV at all, obviously, but worse than the other CVs. So, let's go over the captain skills and upgrades on that I use on the Audacious. I don't know if these are the best ones, but these are what I use. So I start with Air Supremacy, then Improved Engines, then Survivability Expert, then Site Stabilization and Aircraft Armor. This is standard until now. But next, I don't take Concealment Expert. Instead, I go for Demolition Expert, because 5% chance of causing fire per bomb is actually amazing. Because look at this, you drop... How many bombs do you drop? You drop 6 bombs with 3 planes, so 18 bombs total. And increasing the fire chance of each by 5%, you know, from 37 to 42, that's a significant increase in fire chance. And it also improves your fire chance with your rocket planes that drop 1,000,000 rockets. Because those are the only ways that you can really deal damage with them. And torpedo acceleration, because the torpedoes, even with all of this, are only 42 knots. you know. Okay, something to consider though. With airdrop torpedoes, you have to understand that they aren't based on distance. So if your torpedoes are faster, you have to drop them further away. However, you have to understand though that that is if you're talking about a perfect drop, but you can never do a really perfect drop with torpedoes because the enemy might turn in instead of out, or some other maneuver like that, or they turn out. In either case, faster torpedoes will be better because they'll cover the distance that isn't covered by the arming time faster. And as a result, I have boosted the torpedo speed of these torpedo bombers. On other ships, I don't think it's on other CVs. I don't think it's quite necessary, but on the Audacious, I kind of do. And then improved engine boost, obviously. Concealment expert is nice and all, but CV concealment doesn't really matter, and the plane concealment also doesn't matter. It's just not good enough to really do much with it anyway. And CV concealment isn't important because, I mean, even if you get close to the enemy, if the enemy planes fly over your ship and spot you, enemies are still gonna take pot shots at you. Let's go over the upgrades, I suppose. So obviously plane speed, so that you can do more strikes. Then I do use concealment. That's actually weird. I should have used flight control, because this allows you to have more planes in reserve and faster. Then I use torpedo bomber HP, because it synergizes with the heal, and torps are pretty decent, I think. Although maybe level bomber HP would be good too. Here I use aerial torpedo speed, again for the same reason as before. The other two, they're nice to haves, but I think the aerial torpedo speed is better here. And then aircraft engine modification for more boost, and then air groups modification 1. So let's go over the armor and why you can't go close in an Audacious. So, see, it's an armor tech in the middle, right? See, 38mm, 102mm, but here's the outer parts, 25mm foredeck and the aft deck as well. And then you have the 21mm bow and side armor and all of that. And this is the downside. All of the yellow and orange parts can take damage from salvos. Even this part can take HE damage from quite a few ships, right? If an HE shell from, I think, like a Yoshino or a Stalingrad lands on here, you're gonna take damage. And, you know, the Citadel isn't, like, incredibly well positioned either. Actually, wait, no, that's still casemate. It's fairly low, right? You can see, but it's still above the water, and it isn't like amazingly well armored, at least as far as the game shows you. So, you know, you go bow onto an enemy and they just fire at your bow, and they'll go through, and some might end up in the Citadel. Actually, I don't know if the shells can reach all that distance through a ship before exploding, but there's a chance, I suppose. Especially since this portion here is also only 25, so virtually every battleship will overmatch this portion too. Now let's compare this to a Richthofen, for example. Or let's just look at the midway. Look at this. The entire deck is 87mm. If you hit any part of this with HE on, I think, almost any battleship in the game, maybe with like IFHE on a Grosse Kaufest or something, you can't pin this. Right? HE, AP, it doesn't matter. Everything will always bounce off of it or fail to penetrate. You can deal damage to that. Then, sure, the side armor is 19 instead of 22, but it doesn't matter. Because this alone here is already pretty good. Now, you can go through the bow of the midway again, and midway isn't amazingly armored either, like, you know, like the Richthofen is, but it's better than the Audacious. Here, let's take a look at the Citadel as well. It is a much, much larger Citadel. But, you know, you're gonna play the same way in both of them. You don't want to be shot at regardless. And let's take a look at the Richthofen now. By the way, this is the Richthofen Citadel, which is about as big as the other one, right? But, you can see, it has, what's it called, turtle black. And look at this. 50mm deck, so you can go through this, but AP shells will still bounce off of it. But look at this. Look at this. 60mm icebreaker to the very front, and then you have 150mm side armor there. AP shells here will simply bounce off. You would have to hit the green parts to deal damage. And sure, they're 19 and all, but there's a lot less of it, and it's a lot harder to land shells over here. Which means that Richthofen is much better to go close in, Midway is much better to go close in, and I suppose we can take a look at the Hakuryu too, but the story is basically the same. I mean, look at that. 95mm! Gets better and better, although this is a ginormous 19mm bow. So you can absolutely go through the bow, as you can on the Midway and the Audacious, but at least the armor deck from range when battleships take a shot at you, you're less worried. And the Citadel is also fairly large, but it's, again, okay. It's not the end of the world. So, moral of the story is, concealment on a carrier herself, it's helpful, obviously, but it doesn't really make or break a ship. It isn't a big advantage, and therefore concealment on a CV isn't as important. So when you get the legendary of the Audacious, which lowers your concealment even further, it's not really worth it. I'm sorry. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I would like to thank the patrons on Patreon. Thank you very much for your continued support, and I hope I'll see you guys next time.